Parasite Planet by Stanley Weinbaum. Chapter 1. Luckily for Hammond, it was midwinter when the mud spout came. Midwinter, that is, in the Venusian sense, which is nothing at all like the conception of the season generally entertained on Earth, except possibly by dwellers in the hotter regions of the Amazon basin or the Congo. They, perhaps, might form a vague mental picture of winter on Venus by visualizing their hottest summer days, multiplying the heat, discomfort, and unpleasant denizens of the jungle by 10 or 12. On Venus, as is now well known, the seasons occur alternately in opposite hemispheres, as on the Earth, but with a very important difference. Here, when North America and Europe swelter in summer, it is winter in Australia and Cape Colony and Argentina. It is the northern and southern hemispheres which alternate their seasons. But on Venus, very strangely, it is the eastern and western hemispheres, because the seasons of Venus depend not on inclination of the plane of the ecliptic, but on libration. Venus does not rotate, but keeps the same face always toward the sun, just as the moon does toward the earth. One face is forever daylight, and the other forever night, and only along the twilight zone, a strip 500 miles wide, is human habitation possible, a thin ring of territory circling the planet. Toward the sunlit side, it verges into the blasting heat of a desert where only a few Venusian creatures live, and on the night edge, the strip ends abruptly in the colossal ice barrier produced by the condensation of the upper winds that sweep endlessly from the rising air of the hot hemisphere to cool and sink and rush back again from the cold one. The chilling of warm air always produces rain, and at the edge of the darkness the rain freezes to form these great ramparts. What lies beyond, what fantastic forms of life may live in the starless darkness of the frozen face, or whether that region is as dead as the airless moon, those are mysteries. But the slow libration, a ponderous wobbling of the planet from side to side, does produce the effect of seasons. On the lands of the twilight zone, first in the one hemisphere and then on the other, the cloud-hidden sun seems to rise gradually for 15 days, then sink for the same period. It never ascends far, and only near the ice barrier does it seem to touch the horizon. For the libration is only 7 degrees, but it is sufficient to produce notable 15-day seasons. But such seasons! In the winter, the temperature drops sometimes to a humid but bearable 90. But 2 weeks later, 140 is a cool day near the torrid edge of the zone. And always, winter and summer, the intermittent rains drip sullenly down to be absorbed by the spongy soil and given back again as sticky, unpleasant, unhealthy steam. And that, the vast amount of moisture on Venus, was the greatest surprise of the first human visitors. The clouds had been seen, of course, but the spectroscope denied the presence of water, naturally, since it was analyzing light reflected from the upper cloud surfaces 50 miles above the planet's face. That abundance of water has strange consequences. There are no seas or oceans on Venus if we expect the probability of vast, silent, and eternally frozen oceans on the sunless side. On the hot hemisphere, evaporation is too rapid, and the rivers that flow out of the ice mountains simply diminish and finally vanish, dried up. A further consequence is the curiously unstable nature of the land of the twilight zone. Enormous subterranean rivers course invisibly through it, some boiling, some cold as the ice from which they flow. These are the cause of the mud eruptions that make human habitation in the hotlands such a gamble. A perfectly solid and apparently safe area of soil may be changed suddenly into a boiling sea of mud in which buildings sink and vanish, together, frequently, with their occupants. There is no way of predicting these catastrophes. Only on the rare outcroppings of bedrock is a structure safe, and so all permanent human settlements cluster about the mountains. Ham Hammond was a trader. He was one of those adventurous individuals who always appear on the frontiers and fringes of habitable regions. Most of these fall into two classes. They are either reckless daredevils pursuing danger, or outcasts, criminal or otherwise, pursuing either solitude or forgetfulness. Ham Hammond was neither. He was pursuing no such abstractions, but the good, solid lure of wealth. He was, in fact, trading with the natives for the spore pods of the Venusian plant Ixchel, from which terrestrial chemists would extract trihydroxyl tertiary toluenitrile beta-anthraquinine, or Zixtline, or triple TBA, that was so effective in rejuvenation treatments. Ham was young, and sometimes wondered why rich old men and women would pay such tremendous prices for a few more years of virility, especially as the treatments didn't actually increase the span of life, but just produced a sort of temporary and synthetic youth. Gray hair darkened, wrinkles filled out, bald heads grew fuzzy, and then, in a few years, the rejuvenated person was just as dead as he would have been anyway. But as long as triple TBA commanded a price about equal to its weight in radium, why, Ham was willing to take the gamble to obtain it. He had never really expected the mudspout. Of course, it was an ever-present danger, but when, staring idly through the window of a shack over the writhing and steaming Venusian plain, he had seen the sudden boiling pools erupting all around it, it had come as a shocking surprise. For a moment he was paralyzed. Then he sprang into immediate and frantic action. He pulled on his enveloping suit of rubber-like transkin. He strapped the great bowls of mud shoes to his feet. He tied the precious bag of spore pods to his shoulders, packed some food, and then burst into the open. The ground was still semi-solid, but even as he watched, the black soil boiled out around the metal walls of the shack, the cube tilted a trifle, and then sank deliberately from sight, and the mud sucked and gurgled as it closed gently above the spot. Ham caught himself. One couldn't stand still in the midst of a mudspout, even with bowl-like mud shoes as support. Once let the viscous stuff flow over the rim, and the luckless victim was trapped. He couldn't raise his foot against the suction, and first slowly, then more quickly, he'd follow the shack. So Ham started off over the boiling swamp, walking with the peculiar sliding motion he had learned by much practice, never raising the mud shoes above the surface, but sliding them along, careful that no mud topped the curving rim. It was a tiresome motion, but absolutely necessary. He slid along as if on snowshoes, bearing west, because that was the direction of the dark side, and if he had to walk to safety, he might as well do it in coolness. The area of swamp was unusually large. He covered at least a mile before he attained a slight rise in the ground, and the mud shoes clumped on solid or nearly solid soil. He was bathed in perspiration, and his transkin suit was hot as a boiler room, but one grows accustomed to that on Venus. He'd have given half his supply of Zixchel pods for the opportunity to open the mask of the suit, to draw a breath of even the steamy and humid Venusian air, but that was impossible. Impossible, at least, if he had any inclination to continue living. One breath of unfiltered air anywhere near the warm edge of the twilight zone was quick and very painful death. Ham would have drawn in uncounted millions of the spores of those fierce Venusian molds, and they'd have sprouted in furry and nauseating masses in his nostrils, his mouth, his lungs, and eventually in his ears and eyes. Breathing them wasn't even a necessary requirement, once he'd come upon a trader's body with the molds springing from his flesh. The poor fellow had somehow torn a rip in his transkin suit, and that was enough. The situation made eating and drinking in the open a problem on Venus. One had to wait until a rain had precipitated the spores, when it was safe for half an hour or so. Even then, the water must have been recently boiled, and the food just removed from its can. Otherwise, as has happened to Ham more than once, the food was apt to turn abruptly into a fuzzy mass of molds that grew about as fast as the minute hand moved on a clock. A disgusting sight. A disgusting planet. That last reflection was induced by Ham's view of the quagmire that had engulfed his shack. The heavier vegetation had gone with it, but already avid and greedy life was emerging, wriggling mudgrass and the bulbous fungi called walking balls. And all around, a million little slimy creatures slithered across the mud, eating each other rapaciously, being torn to bits and each fragment reforming to a complete creature. 1,000 different species, but all the same in one respect. Each of them was all appetite. In common with most Venusian beings, they had a multiplicity of both legs and mouths. In fact, some of them were little more than blobs of skin, split into dozens of hungry mouths and crawling on 100 spidery legs. All life on Venus is more or less parasitic. Even the plants that draw their nourishment directly from the soil and air have also the ability to absorb and digest, and often enough to trap, animal food. So fierce is the competition on that humid strip of land between the fire and the ice that one who has never seen it must fail even to imagine it. The animal kingdom wars incessantly on itself and the plant world. The vegetable kingdom retaliates and frequently outdoes the other in the production of monstrous predatory horrors that one would even hesitate to call plant life. A terrible world. In the few moments that Ham had paused to look back, ropey creepers had already entangled his legs. Transkin was impervious, of course, but he had to cut the things away with his knife, and the black, nauseating juices that flowed out of them smeared on his suit and began instantly to grow furry as the molds sprouted. He shuddered. "Hell of a place," Ham growled, stooping to remove his mud shoes, which he slung carefully over his back. He slogged away through the writhing vegetation, automatically dodging the awkward thrusts of the jack-ketch trees as they cast their nooses hopefully towards his arms and head. Now and again he passed one that dangled some trapped creature, usually unrecognizable because the molds had enveloped it in a fuzzy shroud, while the tree itself was placidly absorbing victim and molds alike. "Horrible place," Ham muttered, kicking a writhing mass of nameless little vermin from his path. He mused. His shack had been situated rather nearer the hot edge of the twilight zone. It was a trifle over 250 miles to the shadow line, though of course that varied with the libration. But one couldn't approach the line too closely, anyway, because of the fierce, almost inconceivable storms that raged where the hot upper winds encountered the icy blasts of the night side, giving rise to the birth throes of the ice barrier. So 150 miles due west would be sufficient to bring coolness, to enter a region too temperate for the molds, where he could walk in comparative comfort. And then, not more than 50 miles north, lay the American settlement, Iradia, named, obviously, after that troublesome mythical son of Venus, Cupid. Intervening, of course, were the ranges of the mountains of eternity, not those mighty 20-mile-high peaks whose summits are occasionally glimpsed by Earth telescopes, and that forever sunder British Venus from the American possessions, but even at the point he planned to cross, very respectable mountains indeed. He was on the British side now, not that anyone cared. Traders came and went as they pleased. Well, that meant about 200 miles. No reason why he couldn't make it. He was armed with both automatic and flame pistol, and water was no problem if carefully boiled. Under pressure of necessity, one could even eat Venusian life, but it required hunger and thorough cooking and a sturdy stomach. It wasn't the taste so much as the appearance, or so he'd been told. He grimaced. Beyond doubt he'd be driven to find out for himself, since his canned food couldn't possibly last out the trip. Nothing to worry about, Ham kept telling himself. In fact, plenty to be glad about. The Zixelpods in his pack represented as much wealth as he could have accumulated by 10 years of toil back on Earth. No danger, and yet men had vanished on Venus, dozens of them. The molds had claimed them, or some fierce, unearthly monster, or perhaps one of the many unknown living horrors, both plant and animal. Ham trudged along, keeping always to the clearings about the jack-ketch trees, since these vegetable omnivores kept other life beyond the reach of their greedy nooses. Elsewhere, progress was impossible, for the Venusian jungle presented such a terrific tangle of writhing and struggling forms that one could move only by cutting the way, step by step, with infinite labor. Even then, there was the danger of heaven only knew what fanged and venomous creatures whose teeth might pierce the protective membrane of Transkin, and a crack in that meant death. Even the unpleasant jack-ketch trees were preferable company, he reflected, as he slapped their questing lariats aside. 6 hours after Ham started his involuntary journey, it rained. He seized the opportunity, found a place where a recent mudspout had cleared the heavier vegetation away, and prepared to eat. First, however, he scooped up some scummy water, filtered it through the screen attached for that purpose to his canteen, and set about sterilizing it. Fire was difficult to manage, since dry fuel is rare indeed in the hotlands of Venus, but Ham tossed a thermide tablet into the liquid, and the chemicals boiled the water instantly, escaping themselves as gases. If the water retained a slight ammoniacal taste, well, that was the least of his discomforts, he mused, as he covered it and set it by to cool. He uncapped a can of beans, watched a moment to see that no stray molds had remained in the air to infect the food, then opened the visor of his suit and swallowed hastily. Thereafter he drank the blood-warm water and poured carefully what remained into the water pouch within his transkin, where he could suck it through a tube to his mouth without the deadly exposure to the molds. 10 minutes after he completed the meal, while he rested and longed for the impossible luxury of a cigarette, the fuzzy coat sprang suddenly to life on the remnants of food in the can. Chapter 2. An hour later, weary and thoroughly soaked in perspiration, Ham found a friendly tree, so named by the explorer Burlingham because it is one of the few organisms on Venus sluggish enough to permit one to rest in its branches. So Ham climbed it, found the most comfortable position available, and slept as best he could. It was 5 hours by his wristwatch before he awoke, and the tendrils and little sucking cups of the friendly tree were fastened all over his transkin. He tore them away very carefully, climbed down, and trudged westward. It was after the second rain that he met the dough-pot, as the creature is called in British and American Venus. In the French strip is the poêle, the paste-pot. In the Dutch, well, the Dutch are not prudish, and they call the horror just what they think it warrants. Actually, the dough-pot is a nauseous creature. It's a mass of white, dough-like protoplasm, ranging in size from a single cell to perhaps 20 tons of mushy filth. It has no fixed form. In fact, it's merely a mass of deproused cells, in effect, a disembodied, crawling, hungry cancer. It has no organization and no intelligence, nor even any instinct, save hunger. It moves in whatever direction food touches its surfaces. When it touches 2 edible substances, it quietly divides, with the larger portion invariably attacking the greater supply. It's invulnerable to bullets. Nothing less than the terrific blast of a flame pistol will kill it, and then only if the blast destroys every individual cell. It travels over the ground, absorbing everything, leaving bare black soil where the ubiquitous molds spring up at once, a noisome, nightmarish creature. Ham sprang aside as the dough-pot erupted suddenly from the jungle to his right. It couldn't absorb the transkin, of course, but to be caught in that pasty mess meant quick suffocation. He glared at it disgustedly, and was sorely tempted to blast it with his flame pistol as it slithered past at running speed. He would have, too, but the experienced Venusian frontiersman is very careful with the flame pistol. It has to be charged with a diamond, a cheap black one, of course, but still an item to consider. The crystal, when fired, gives up all its energy in one terrific blast that roars out like a lightning stroke for 100 yards, incinerating everything in its path. The thing rolled by with a sucking and a gulping sound. Behind it opened the passage it had cleared. Creepers, snake vines, jack-ketch trees, everything had been swept away down to the humid earth itself, where already the molds were springing up on the slime of the Dough-Pot's trail. The alley led nearly in the direction Ham wanted to travel. He seized the opportunity and strode briskly along, with a wary eye, nevertheless, on the ominous walls of jungle. In 10 hours or so, the opening would be filled once more with unpleasant life. But for the present, it offered a much quicker progress than dodging from one clearing to the next. It was 5 miles up the trail, which was already beginning to sprout inconveniently, that he met the native galloping along on his 4 short legs, his pincer-like hands shearing a path for him. Ham stopped for a palaver. "Brrrah!" he said. The language of the natives of the equatorial regions of the Hotlands is a queer one. It has, perhaps, 200 words, but when a trader has learned those 200, his knowledge of the tongue is but little greater than a man who knows none at all. The words are generalized, and each sound has anywhere from a dozen to 100 meanings. Murrah, for instance, is a word of greeting. It may mean something much like hello or good morning. It may also convey a challenge, on guard. It means besides, let's be friends, and also, strangely, let's fight this out. It has, moreover, certain noun senses. It means peace, it means war, it means courage, and again, fear. A subtle language, it is only very recently that studies of inflection have begun to reveal its nature to human philologists. Yet, after all, perhaps English, with its two, and two, its one, wan, went, win, when, and a dozen other similarities, might seem just as strange to Venusian ears, untrained in vowel distinctions. Moreover, humans can't read the expressions of the broad, flat, three-eyed Venusian faces, which, in the nature of things, must convey a world of information among the natives themselves. But this one accepted the intended sense. "Murrah!" he responded, pausing. "Usk!" That was, among other things, "Who are you?" or "Where did you come from?" or "Where are you bound?" Ham chose the latter sense. He pointed off into the dim west, then raised his hand in an arc to indicate the mountains. "Iratia," he said. That had but one meaning, at least. The native considered this in silence. At last he grunted and volunteered some information. He swept his cutting claw in a gesture west along the trail. "Kurki," he said, and then "Murrah." The last was farewell. Ham pressed against the wriggling jungle wall to permit him to pass. Kurki meant, together with 20 other senses, trader. It was the word usually applied to humans, and Ham felt a pleasant anticipation in the prospect of human company. It had been 6 months since he had heard a human voice other than that on the tiny radio now sunk with his shack. True enough, 5 miles along the Dough-Pot's trail, Ham emerged suddenly in an area where there had been a recent mudspout. The vegetation was only waist-high, and across the quarter-mile clearing he saw a structure, a trading hut, but far more pretentious than his own iron-walled cubicle. This one boasted 3 rooms, an unheard-of luxury in the Hotlands, where every ounce had to be laboriously transported by rocket from one of the settlements. That was expensive, almost prohibitive. Traders took a real gamble, and Ham knew he was lucky to have come out so profitably. he strode over the still spongy ground. The windows were shaded against the eternal daylight, and the door was locked. This was a violation of the frontier code. One always left doors unlocked. It might mean the salvation of some strayed trader, and not even the most dishonorable would steal from a hut left open for his safety. Nor would the natives. No creature is as honest as a Venusian native, who never lies and never steals, though he might, after due warning, kill a trader for his trade goods, but only after a fair warning. Ham stood puzzled. At last he kicked and tramped a clear space before the door, sat down against it, and fell to snapping away the numerous and loathsome little creatures that swarmed over his transkin. He waited. It wasn't half an hour before he saw the trader plowing through the clearing, a short, slim fellow. The transkin shaded his face, but Ham could make out large, shadowed eyes. He stood up. "Hello," he said jovially. "Thought I'd drop in for a visit. My name's Hamilton Hammond. You guessed the nickname." The newcomer stopped short, then spoke in a curiously soft and husky voice with a decidedly English accent. "My guess would be boiled pork, I fancy." The tones were cold, unfriendly. "Suppose you step aside and let me in. Good day." Ham felt anger and amazement. "The devil!" he snapped. "You're a hospitable sort, aren't you?" "No, not at all." The other paused at the door. "You're an American. What are you doing on British soil? Have you a passport?" "Since when do you need a passport in the Heartlands?" "Trading, aren't you?" the slim man said sharply. "In other words, poaching. You've got no right here. Get on." Ham's jaw set stubbornly behind his mask. "Rights or none," he said, "I'm entitled to the consideration of the frontier code. I want a breath of air and a chance to wipe my face, and also a chance to eat. If you open that door, I'm coming in after you." An automatic flashed into view. "Do, and you'll feed the moles." Ham, like all Venusian traders, was of necessity bold, resourceful, and what is called in the States hard-boiled. He didn't flinch, but said in apparent yielding, "All right, but listen, all I want is a chance to eat." "Wait for a rain," said the other coolly, and half turned to unlock the door. As his eyes shifted, Ham kicked at the revolver. It went spinning against the wall and dropped into the weeds. His opponent snatched for the flame pistol that still dangled on his hip. Ham caught his wrist in a mighty clutch. Instantly the other ceased to struggle, while Ham felt a momentary surprise at the skinny feel of the wrist through its transkin covering. "Look here," he growled. "I want a chance to eat, and I'm going to get it. Unlock that door." He had both wrists now. The fellow seemed curiously delicate. After a moment he nodded, and Ham released one hand. The door opened, and he followed the other in. Again, unheard-of magnificence. Solid chairs, a sturdy table, even books, carefully preserved, no doubt, by lycopodium against the ravenous molds that sometimes entered Hotland shacks in spite of screen filters and automatic spray. An automatic spray was going now to destroy any spores that might have entered with the opening door. Ham sat down, keeping an eye on the other, whose flame pistol he had permitted to remain in its holster. He was confident of his ability to outdraw the slim individual, and besides, who'd risk firing a flame pistol indoors? It would simply blow out one wall of the building. So he set about opening his mask, removing food from his pack, wiping his steaming face, while his companion, or opponent, looked on silently. Ham watched the canned meat for a moment. No molds appeared, and he ate. "Why the devil," he rasped, "don't you open your visor?" At the other's silence, he continued, "Afraid I'll see your face, eh? Well, I'm not interested. I'm no cop." No reply. He tried again. "What's your name?" The cool voice sounded, "Burlingham. Pat Burlingham." Ham laughed. Patrick Burlingham is dead, my friend. I knew him. No answer. And if you don't want to tell your name, at least you needn't insult the memory of a brave man and a great explorer. Thank you. The voice was sardonic. He was my father. Another lie. He had no son. He had only a... Ham paused abruptly. A feeling of consternation swept over him. "Open your visor!" he yelled. He saw the lips of the other, dim through the transkin, twitch into a sarcastic smile. "Why not?" said the soft voice, and the mask dropped. Ham gulped. Behind the covering were the delicately molded features of a girl with cool gray eyes, in a face lovely despite the glistening perspiration on cheeks and forehead. The man gulped again. After all, he was a gentleman, despite his profession as one of the fierce, adventurous traders of Venus. He was university educated, an engineer, and only the lure of quick wealth had brought him to the heartlands. I'm sorry," he stammered. "You brave American poachers," she sneered. "Are all of you so valiant as to force yourselves on women?" "But how could I know? What are you doing in a place like this?" "There's no reason for me to answer your questions, but," she gestured toward the room beyond, "I'm classifying Heartland flora and fauna. I'm Patricia Burlingham, biologist." He perceived now the jar-enclosed specimens of a laboratory in the next chamber. "But a girl alone in the Heartlands, it's reckless." "I didn't expect to meet any American poachers," she retorted. He flushed. "You needn't worry about me. I'm going." He raised his hands to his visor. Instantly, Patricia snatched an automatic from the table drawer. "You're going indeed, Mr. Hamilton Hammond," she said coolly, "but you're leaving your six-shell with me. It's Crown property. You've stolen it from British territory, and I'm confiscating it." He stared. "Look here," he blazed suddenly. "I've risked all I have for that six-shell. If I lose it, I'm ruined. Busted. I'm not giving it up." "But you are." He dropped his mask and sat down. "Miss Burlingham," he said, "I don't think you've nerve enough to shoot me, but that's what you'll have to do to get it. Otherwise, I'll sit here until you drop of exhaustion." Her gray eyes bored silently into his blue ones. The gun held steadily on his heart, but spat no bullet. It was a deadlock. At last the girl said, "You win, poacher." She slapped the gun into her empty holster. "Get out, then." "Gladly," he snapped. He rose, fingered his visor, then dropped it again at a sudden, startled scream from the girl. He whirled, suspecting a trick, but she was staring out of the window with wide, apprehensive eyes. Ham saw the writhing of vegetation, and then a vast whitish mass. A dough-pot, a monstrous one, bearing steadily toward their shelter. He heard the gentle clunk of impact, and then the window was blotted out by the pasty mess as the creature, not quite large enough to engulf the building, split into two masses that flowed around and re-merged on the other side. Another cry from Patricia. "Your mask, fool!" she rasped. "Close it!" "Mask? Why?" Nevertheless, he obeyed automatically. "Why? That's why. The digestive acids. Look!" She pointed at the walls. Indeed, thousands of tiny pinholes of light were appearing. The digestive acids of the monstrosity, powerful enough to attack whatever food chance brought, had corroded the metal. It was porous. The shack was ruined. He gasped as fuzzy molds shot instantly from the remains of his meal, and a red and green fur sprouted from the wood of chairs and a table. The two faced each other. Ham chuckled. "Well," he said, "you're homeless too. Mine went down in a mudspout." "Yours would," Patricia retorted acidly. "You Yankees couldn't think of finding shallow soil, I suppose. bedrock is just 6 feet below here, and my place is on pylons." "Well, you're a cool devil. Anyway, your place might as well be sunk. What are you going to do?" "Do? Don't concern yourself. I'm quite able to manage." "How?" "It's no affair of yours, but I have a rocket call each month." "You must be a millionaire, then," he commented. "The Royal Society," she said coldly, "is financing this expedition. The rocket is due—" She paused. Ham thought she paled a little behind her mask. "Due when?" "Why, it just came 2 days ago. I'd forgotten." "I see. And you think you'll just stick around for a month waiting for it? Is that it?" Patricia stared at him defiantly. "Do you know," he resumed, "what you'd be in a month? It's 10 days to summer, and look at your shack." He gestured at the walls, where brown and rusty patches were forming. At his motion, a piece the size of a saucer tumbled in with a crackle. "In 2 days, this thing will be a caved-in ruin. What'll you do during 15 days of summer? What do you do without shelter when the temperature reaches 150, 160? I'll tell you, you'll die." She said nothing. "You'll be a fuzzy mass of molds before the rocket returns," Ham said, "and then a pile of clean bones that will go down with the first mudspout." "Be still!" she blazed. "Silence won't help. Now, I'll tell you what you can do. You can take your pack and your mud shoes and walk along with me. We can make the cool country before summer, if you can walk as well as you talk." "Go with a Yankee poacher? I fancy not." "And then," he continued imperturbably, "we can cross comfortably to Aradia, a good American town." Patricia reached for her emergency pack, slung it over her shoulders. She retrieved a thick bundle of notes, written in aniline ink on transkin, brushed off a few vagrant molds, and slipped it into the pack. She picked up a pair of diminutive mud shoes and turned deliberately to the door. "So, you're coming," he chuckled. "I'm going," she retorted coldly, "to the good British town of Venoble, alone." "Venoble!" he gasped. "That's 200 miles south, and across the greater eternities, too." Chapter 3. Patricia walked silently out of the door and turned west toward the cool country. Ham hesitated a moment, then followed. He couldn't permit the girl to attempt that journey alone. Since she ignored his presence, he simply trailed a few steps behind her, plodding grimly and angrily along. For 3 hours or more they trudged through the endless daylight, dodging the thrusts of the jack-ketch trees, but mostly following the still fairly open trail of the first dough-pot. Ham was amazed at the agile and lithe grace of the girl, who slipped along the way with the sure skill of a native. Then a memory came to him. She was a native, in a sense. He recalled now that Patrick Burlingham's daughter was the first human child born on Venus in the colony of Venoble founded by her father. Ham remembered the newspaper articles when she had been sent to Earth to be educated. A child of 8. He had been 13 then. He was 27 now, which made Patricia Burlingham 22. Not a word passed between them until at last the girl swung about in exasperation. "Go away!" she blazed. Ham halted. "I'm not bothering you." "But I don't want a bodyguard. I'm a better Hotlander than you." He didn't argue the point. He kept silent, and after a moment she flashed. "I hate you, Yankee! Lord, how I hate you!" She turned and trudged on. An hour later the mudspout caught them. Without warning, watery muck boiled up around their feet, and the vegetation swayed wildly. Hastily they strapped on their mud shoes, while the heavier plants sank with sullen gurgles around them. Again Ham marveled at the girl's skill. Patricia slipped away across the unstable surface with a speed he could not match, and he shuffled far behind. Suddenly he saw her stop. That was dangerous in a mudspout. Only an emergency could explain it. He hurried. 100 feet away he perceived the reason. A strap had broken on her right shoe, and she stood helpless, balancing on her left foot, while the remaining bowl was sinking slowly. Even now, black mud slopped over the edge. She eyed him as he approached. He shuffled to her side. As she saw his intention, she spoke. "You can't," she said. Ham bent cautiously, slipping his arms about her knees and shoulders. Her mudshoe was already embedded, but he heaved mightily, driving the rims of his own dangerously close to the surface. With a great sucking gulp, she came free, and lay very still in his arms, so as not to unbalance him as he slid again into careful motion over the treacherous surface. She was not heavy, but it was a hairbreadth chance, and the mud slipped and gurgled at the very edge of his shoe bowls. Even though Venus has slightly less surface gravitation than Earth, a week or so gets one accustomed to it, and the 20% advantage in weight seems to disappear. 100 yards brought firm footing. He sat her down and unstrapped his mudshoes. "Thank you," she said coolly. "That was brave." "You're welcome," he replied dryly. "I suppose this will end any idea of your traveling alone. Without both mudshoes, the next bout will be the last for you. Do we walk together now?" Her voice chilled. "I can make a substitute shoe from tree skin." Not even a native could walk on tree skin. "Then," she said, "I'll simply wait a day or two for the mud to dry and dig up my lost one." He laughed and gestured at the acres of mud. "Dig where?" he countered. "You'll be here till summer if you try that." She yielded. "You win again, Yankee, but only to the cool country. Then you'll go north and I south." They trudged on. Patricia was as tireless as Ham himself, and vastly more adept in Hotland lore. Though they spoke but little, he never ceased to wonder at the skill she had in picking the quickest route, and she seemed to sense the thrusts of the jack-ketch trees without looking. But it was when they halted at last, after a rain had given opportunity for a hasty meal, that he had real cause to thank her. "Sleep," he suggested, and as she nodded, "There's a friendly tree." He moved toward it, the girl behind. Suddenly she seized his arm. "It's a Pharisee!" she cried, jerking him back. None too soon. The fake friendly tree had lashed down with a terrible stroke that missed his face by inches. It was no friendly tree at all, but an imitator, luring prey within reach by its apparent harmlessness, then striking with knife-sharp spikes. Ham gasped. "What is it? I never saw one of those before." "A Pharisee. It just looks like a friendly tree." She took her automatic and sent a bullet into the black pulsing trunk. A dark stream gushed, and the ubiquitous molds sprang into life about the hole. The tree was doomed. "Thanks," said Ham awkwardly. "I guess you saved my life." "We're quits now." She gazed levelly at him. "Understand? We're even." Later they found a true friendly tree and slept. Awakening, they trudged on again, and slept again, and so on for 3 nightless days. No more mudspouts burst about them, but all the other horrors of the Hotlands were well in evidence. Dough-pots crossed their path, snake vines hissed and struck, the jack-ketch trees flung their sinister nooses, and a million little crawling things writhed underfoot or dropped upon their suits. Once they encountered a uniped, that queer kangaroo-like creature that leaps crashing through the jungle on a single mighty leg, and thrusts to its 10-foot beak to spear its prey. When Ham missed his first shot, the girl brought it down in mid-leap to thresh into the avid clutches of the jack-ketch trees and the merciless moles. On another occasion, Patricia had both feet caught in a jack-ketch noose that lay for some unknown cause on the ground. As she stepped within it, the tree jerked her suddenly to dangle head down a dozen feet in the air, and she hung helplessly until Ham managed to cut her free. Beyond doubt, either would have died alone on any of several occasions. Together they pulled through. Yet neither relaxed the cool, unfriendly attitude that had become habitual. Ham never addressed the girl unless necessary, and she, in the rare instances when they spoke, called him always by no other name than Yankee Poacher. In spite of this, the man found himself sometimes remembering the piquant loveliness of her features, her brown hair, and level gray eyes, as he had glimpsed them in the brief moments when rain made it safe to open their visors. At last, one day, a wind stirred out of the west, bringing with it a breath of coolness that was like the air of heaven to them. It was the underwind, the wind that blew from the frozen half of the planet, that breathed cold from beyond the ice barrier. When Ham experimentally shaved the skin from a writhing weed, the molds sprang out more slowly and with an encouraging sparseness. They were approaching the cool country. They found a friendly tree with lightened hearts. Another day's trek might bring them to the uplands, where one could walk unhooded, in safety from the molds, since these could not sprout in a temperature much below 80. Han woke first. For a while he gazed silently across at the girl, smiling at the way the branches of the tree had encircled her like affectionate arms. They were merely hungry, of course, but it looked like tenderness. His smile turned a little sad as he realized that the cool country meant parting unless he could discourage that insane determination of hers to cross the greater eternities. He sighed and reached for his pack slung on a branch between them, and suddenly a bellow of rage and astonishment broke from him. His ichthyopods! The transkin pouch was slit. They were gone! Patricia woke startled at his cry. Then, behind her mask, he sensed an ironic, mocking smile. "My Zixel!" he roared. "Where is it?" She pointed down. There among the lesser growths was a little mound of molds. "There," she said coolly. "Down there, Poacher." "You—" He choked with rage. "Yes, I slit the pouch while you slept. You'll smuggle no stolen wealth from British territory." Ham was white, speechless. "You damn devil!" he bellowed at last. "That's every cent I had!" "But stolen," she reminded him pleasantly, swinging her dainty feet. Rage actually made him tremble. He glared at her. The light struck through the translucent transkin, outlining her body and slim, rounded legs in shadow. "I ought to kill you," he muttered tensely. His hand twitched, and the girl laughed softly. With a groan of desperation, he slung his pack over his shoulders and dropped to the ground. I hope you die in the mountains," he said grimly, and stalked away toward the west. 100 yards distant, he heard her voice. "Yankee, wait a moment." He neither paused nor glanced back, but strode on. Half an hour later, glancing back from the crest of a rise, Ham perceived that she was following him. He turned and hurried on. The way was upward now, and his strength began to outweigh her speed and skill. When next he glimpsed her, she was a plodding speck far behind, moving, he imagined, with a wary doggedness. He frowned back at her. It had occurred to him that a mudspout would find her completely helpless, lacking the vitally important mud shoes. Then he realized that they were beyond the region of mudspouts, here in the foothills of the Mountains of Eternity, and anyway, he decided grimly, he didn't care. For a while, Ham paralleled a river, doubtless an unnamed tributary of the Phlegethon. So far there had been no necessity to cross watercourses, since naturally all streams on Venus flow from the ice barrier across the twilight zone to the hot side, and therefore had coincided with their own direction. But now, once he attained the tablelands and turned north, he would encounter rivers. They had to be crossed, either on logs, or, if opportunity offered and the stream was narrow, through the branches of friendly trees. To set foot in the water was death. Fierce fanged creatures haunted the streams. He had one near catastrophe at the rim of the tableland. It was while he edged through a jack-ketch clearing. Suddenly there was a heave of white corruption, and tree and jungle wall disappeared in the mass of a gigantic dough-pot. He was cornered between the monster and an impenetrable tangle of vegetation, so he did the only thing left to do. He snatched his flame pistol and sent a terrific roaring blast into the horror, a blast that incinerated tons of pasty filth and left a few small fragments crawling and feeding on the debris. The blast also, as it usually does, shattered the barrel of the weapon. He sighed as he set about the 40-minute job of replacing it. No true Highlander ever delays that, for the blast had cost 15 good American dollars, 10 for the cheap diamond that he had exploded, and 5 for the barrel. Nothing at all when he had had his ixchel, but a real item now. He sighed again as he discovered that the remaining barrel was his last. He had been forced to economize on everything when he set out. Ham came at last to the tableland. The fierce and predatory vegetation of the hotlands grew scarce. He began to encounter true plants with no power of movement, and the underwind blew cool in his face. He was in a sort of high valley. To his right were the grey peaks of the lesser eternities, beyond which lay Iradia, and to his left, like a mighty glittering rampart, lay the vast slopes of the greater range, whose peaks were lost in the clouds 15 miles above. He looked at the opening of the rugged Madman's Pass, where it separated two colossal peaks. The pass itself was 25,000 feet in height, but the mountains out-topped it by 50,000 more. One man had crossed that jagged crack on foot, Patrick Burlingham, and that was the way his daughter meant to follow. Ahead, visible as a curtain of shadow, lay the night edge of the twilight zone, and Ham could see the incessant lightnings that flashed forever in this region of endless storms. It was here that the ice barrier crossed the ranges of the mountains of eternity, and the cold underwind, thrust up by the mighty range, met the warm upper winds in a struggle that was one continuous storm, such a storm as only Venus could provide. The river Phlegethon had its source somewhere back in there. Ham surveyed the wildly magnificent panorama. Tomorrow, or rather after resting, he would turn north. Patricia would turn south, and, beyond doubt, would die somewhere on Madman's Pass. For a moment he had a queerly painful sensation, then he frowned bitterly. Let her die if she was fool enough to attempt the pass alone just because she was too proud to take a rocket from an American settlement. She deserved it. He didn't care. He was still assuring himself of that as he prepared to sleep, not in a friendly tree, but in one of the far more friendly specimens of true vegetation, and in the luxury of an open visor. The sound of his name awakened him. He gazed across the tableland to see Patricia just topping the divide, and he felt a moment's wonder at how she had managed to trail him, a difficult feat indeed, in a country where the living vegetation writhes instantly back across one's path. Then he recalled the blast of his flame pistol. The flash and sound would carry for miles, and she must have heard or seen it. Ham saw her glancing anxiously around. "Ham!" she shouted again, not Yankee or poacher, but Ham. He kept a sullen silence. Again she called. He could see her bronzed and piquant features now. She had dropped her transkin hood. She called again. With a despondent little shrug, she turned south along the divide, and he watched her go in grim silence. When the forest hid her from view, he descended and turned slowly north. Very slowly, his steps lagged. It was as if he tugged against some invisible elastic bond. He kept seeing her anxious face and hearing in memory the despondent call. She was going to her death, he believed, and after all, despite what she had done to him, he didn't want that. She was too full of life, too confident, too young, and above all, too lovely to die. True, she was an arrogant, vicious, self-centered devil, cool as crystal and as unfriendly, but she had gray eyes and brown hair, and she was courageous. And at last, with a groan of exasperation, he halted his lagging steps, turned and rushed with almost eager speed into the south. Trailing the girl was easy here, for one trained in the hotlands. The vegetation was slow to mend itself here in the cool country, and now and again he found imprints of her feet, or broken twigs, to mark her path. He found the place where she had crossed the river through tree branches, and he found a place where she had paws to eat. But he saw that she was gaining on him. Her skill and speed outmatched his, and the trail grew steadily older. At last he stopped to rest. The tableland was beginning to curve upward toward the vast mountains of eternity, and on rising ground he knew he could overtake her. So he slept for a while in the luxurious comfort of no transkin at all, just the shorts and shirt that one wore beneath. That was safe here. The eternal underwind, blowing always toward the hotlands, kept drifting mold spores away, and any brought in on the fur of animals died quickly at the first cool breeze. Nor would the true plants of the cool country attack his flesh. He slept 5 hours. The next day of traveling brought another change in the country. The life of the foothills was sparse compared to the tablelands. The vegetation was no longer a jungle, but a forest, an unearthly forest, true, of tree-like growths, whose boles rose 500 feet and then spread not into foliage, but flowery appendages. Only an occasional jack-ketch tree reminded him of the hotlands. Farther on, the forest diminished. Great rock outcroppings appeared, and vast red cliffs with no growths of any kind. Now and then he encountered swarms of the planet's only aerial creatures, the gray, moth-like dusters, large as hawks, but so fragile that a blow shattered them. They darted about, alighting at times to see small squirming things, and tinkling in their curiously bell-like voices. And apparently, almost above him, though really 30 miles distant, loomed the mountains of eternity, their peaks lost in the clouds that swirled 15 miles overhead. Here again it grew difficult to trail, since Patricia scrambled often over bare rock. But little by little the signs grew fresher. Once again his greater strength began to tell, and then he glimpsed her at the base of a colossal escarpment split by a narrow tree-filled canyon. She was peering first at the mighty precipice, then at the cleft, obviously wondering whether it offered a means of scaling the barrier, or whether it was necessary to circle the obstacle. Like himself, she had discarded her transkin and wore the usual shirt and shorts of the cool country, which, after all, is not very cool by terrestrial standards. She looked, he thought, like some lovely forest nymph of the ancient slopes of Pelion. He hurried as she moved into the canyon. "Pat!" he shouted. It was the first time he had spoken her given name. 100 feet within the passage, he overtook her. "You!" she gasped. She looked tired. She had been hurrying for hours, but a light of eagerness flashed in her eyes. "I thought you had. I tried to find you." Ham's face held no responsive light. "Listen here, Pat Burlingham," he said coldly. "You don't deserve any consideration, but I can't see you walking into death. You're a stubborn devil, but you're a woman. I'm taking you to Aradia." The eagerness vanished. "Indeed, Poacher, my father crossed here. I can too." "Your father crossed in midsummer, didn't he? And midsummer's today. You can't make Madman's Pass in less than 5 days, 120 hours, and by then it will be nearly winter, and this longitude will be close to the storm line. You're a fool." She flushed. "The pass is high enough to be in the upper winds. It will be warm." "Warm! Yes, warm with lightning." He paused. The faint rumble of thunder rolled through the canyon. "Listen to that! In 5 days, that will be right over us." He gestured up at the utterly barren slopes. Not even Venusian life can get a foothold up there, or do you think you've got brass enough to be a lightning rod? Maybe you're right. Anger flamed. Rather the lightning than you, Patricia snapped, and then as suddenly softened. I tried to call you back, she said irrelevantly. To laugh at me, he retorted bitterly. No, to tell you I was sorry, and that... I don't want your apology. But I wanted to tell you that... Never mind, he said curtly. I'm not interested in your repentance. The harm's done. He frowned coldly down on her. Patricia said meekly, But I... A crashing and gurgling interrupted her, and she screamed as a gigantic dough-pot burst into view, a colossus that filled the canyon from wall to wall to a 6-foot height as it surged toward them. The horrors were rarer in the cool country, but larger, since the abundance of food in the hotlands kept subdividing them. But this one was a giant, a behemoth, tons and tons of nauseous, ill-smelling corruption heaving up the narrow way. They were cut off. Ham snatched his flame pistol, but the girl seized his arm. No, no, she cried. Too close. It will spatter. Chapter 4. Patricia was right. Unprotected by Transkin, the touch of a fragment of that monstrosity was deadly, and beyond that, the flash of a flame pistol would shower bits of it upon them. He grasped her wrist, and they fled up the canyon, striving for a vantage-way enough to risk a shot, and a dozen feet behind surged the dough-pot, traveling blindly in the only direction it could, the way of food. They gained. Then, abruptly, the canyon, which had been angling southwest, turned sharply south. The light of the eternally eastward sun was hidden. They were in a pit of perpetual shadow, and the ground was bare and a lifeless rock. And as it reached that point, the dough-pot halted. Lacking any organization, any will, it could not move when no food gave it direction. It was such a monster as only the life-swarming climate of Venus could harbor. It lived only by endless eating. The two paused in the shadow. Now what? Muttered Ham. A fair shot at the mass was impossible because of the angle. A blast would destroy only the portion it could reach. Patricia leaped upward, catching a snaky shrub on the wall, so placed that it received a faint ray of light. She tossed it against the pulsing mass. The whole dough-pot lunged forward a foot or two. Lure it in, she suggested. They tried. It was impossible. Vegetation was too sparse. What will happen to the thing? Asked Ham. I saw one stranded on the desert edge of the hotlands, replied the girl. It quivered around for a long time, and then the cells attacked each other. It ate itself. She shuddered. It was horrible. How long? 40 or 50 hours. I won't wait that long, growled Ham. He fumbled in his pack, pulling out his transkin. What will you do? Put this on and try to blast the mass out of here at close range. He fingered his flame pistol. This is my last barrel, he said gloomily. Then more hopefully, but we have yours. The chamber of mine cracked last time I used it, 10 or 12 hours ago, but I have plenty of barrels. Good enough, said Ham. He crept cautiously toward the horrible, pulsating wall of white. He thrust his arm so as to cover the greatest angle, pulled the trigger, and the roar and blazing fire of the blast bellowed echoing through the canyon. Bits of the monster spattered around him, and the thickness of the remainder, lessened by the incineration of tons of filth, was now only 3 feet. The barrel held, he called triumphantly. It saved much time in recharging. 5 minutes later, the weapon crashed again. When the mass of the monstrosity stopped heaving, only 1.5 feet of depth remained, but the barrel had been blown to atoms. We'll have to use yours, he said. Patricia produced one. He took it, and then stared at it in dismay. The barrels of her Enfield-made weapon were far too small for his American pistol stock. He groaned. "Of all the idiots!" he burst out. "Idiots!" she flared. "Because you Yankees use trench mortars for your barrels." "I meant myself. I should have guessed this." He shrugged. "Well, we have our choice now of waiting here for the dough-pot to eat himself or trying to find some other way out of this trap. And my hunch is that this canyon's blind." It was probable, Patricia admitted. The narrow cleft was the product of some vast ancient upheaval that had split the mountain in halves. Since it was not the result of water erosion, it was likely enough that the cleft ended abruptly in an unscalable precipice, but it was possible, too, that somewhere those sheer walls might be surmountable. "We've got time to waste anyway," she concluded. "We might as well try it. Besides—" She wrinkled her dainty nose distastefully at the dough-pot's odor. Still in his transkin, Ham followed her through the shadowy half-dusk. The passage narrowed, then veered west again, but now so high and sheer were the walls that the sun, slightly south of east, cast no light into it. It was a place of shades, like the region of the storm line that divides the twilight zone from the dark hemisphere, not true night, not yet honest day, but a dim middle state. Ahead of him, Patricia's bronzed limbs showed pale instead of tan, and when she spoke, her voice went echoing queerly between the opposing cliffs. A weird place, this chasm, a dusky, unpleasant place. "I don't like this," said Ham. "The pass is cutting closer and closer to the dark. Do you realize no one knows what's in the dark parts of the mountains of eternity?" Patricia laughed. The sound was ghostly. "What danger could there be? Anyway, we still have our automatics." "There's no way up here," Ham grumbled. "Let's turn back." Patricia faced him. "Frightened, Yankee?" Her voice dropped. "The natives say these mountains are haunted." She went on mockingly. "My father told me he saw queer things in Madman's Pass. Do you know that if there is life on the night side, here is the one place it would impinge on the twilight zone, here in the mountains of eternity." She was taunting him. She laughed again, and suddenly her laughter was repeated in a hideous cacophony that hooted out from the sides of the cliffs above them in a horrid medley. She paled. It was Patricia who was frightened now. They stared apprehensively up at the rock walls, where strange shadows flickered and shifted. What was it?" she whispered, and then, "Ham, did you see that?" Ham had seen it. A wild shape had flung itself across the strip of sky, leaping from cliff to cliff far above them. And again came a peal of hooting that sounded like laughter, while shadowy forms moved, fly-like, on the sheer walls. "Let's go back," she gasped. "Quickly!" As she turned, a small black object fell and broke with a sullen pop before them. Ham stared at it. A pod, a spore sac of some unknown variety. A lazy, dusky cloud drifted over it, and suddenly both of them were choking violently. Ham felt his head spinning in dizziness, and Patricia reeled against him. "It's narcotic," she gasped. "Back!" But a dozen more plopped around them. The dusty spores whirled in dark eddies, and breathing was a torment. They were being drugged and suffocated at the same time. Ham had a sudden inspiration. "Mask!" he choked, and pulled his transkin over his face. The filter that kept out the molds of the hotlands cleaned the air of these spores as well. His head cleared. But the girl's covering was somewhere in her pack. She was fumbling for it. Abruptly, she sat down, swaying. "My pack," she murmured. "Take it out with you. You're—" She broke into a fit of coughing. He dragged her under a shallow overhang and ripped her transkin from the pack. "Put it on!" he snapped. A figure flitted silently far up the wall of rock. Ham watched its progress, then aimed his automatic and fired. There was a shrill, rasping scream, answered by a chorus of dissonant ululations, and something as large as a man rolled down to crash not 10 feet from him. The thing was hideous. Ham stared appalled at a creature not unlike a native, 3-eyed, 2-handed, 4-legged, but the hands, though 2-fingered like the Hotlanders, were not pincer-like, but white and clawed. And the face! Not the broad, expressionless face of the others, but a slanting, malevolent, dusky visage, with each eye double the size of the native's. It wasn't dead. It glared hatred, and seized a stone, flinging it at him with weak viciousness. Then it died. Ham didn't know what it was, of course. Actually, it was a Triops noctivivans, the 3-eyed dweller in the dark, the strange, semi-intelligent being that is as yet the only known creature of the night side, and a member of that fierce remnant still occasionally found in the sunless parts of the mountains of eternity. It is perhaps the most vicious creature in the known planets, absolutely unapproachable and delighting in slaughter. At the crash of the shot, the shower of pods had ceased, and a chorus of laughing hoots ensued. Ham seized the respite to pull the girl's transkin over her face. She had collapsed, with it only half on. Then a sharp crack sounded, and a stone rebounded to strike his arm. Others pattered around him, whining past, swift as bullets. Black figures flickered in great leaps against the sky, and their fierce laughter sounded mockingly. He fired at one in mid-air. The cry of pain rasped again, but the creature did not fall. Stones pelted him. They were all small ones, pebble-sized, but they were flung so fiercely that they hummed in passage, and they tore his flesh through his transkin. He turned Patricia on her face, but she moaned faintly as a missile struck her back. He shielded her with his own body. The position was intolerable. He must risk a dash back, even though the dough-pot blocked the opening. Perhaps, he thought, armored in transkin, he could wade through the creature. He knew that it was an insane idea. The gluey mass would roll him into itself to suffocate, but it had to be faced. He gathered the girl in his arms and rushed suddenly down the canyon. Hoots and shrieks and a chorus of mocking laughter echoed around him. Stones struck him everywhere. One glanced from his head, sending him stumbling and staggering against the cliff. But he ran doggedly on. He knew now what drove him. It was the girl he carried. He had to save Patricia Burlingham. Ham reached the bend. Far up on the west wall glowed the cloudy sunlight, and his weird pursuers flung themselves to the dark side. They couldn't stand daylight, and that gave him some assistance. By creeping very close to the eastern wall, he was partially shielded. Ahead was the other bend, blocked by the dough-pot. As he neared it, he turned suddenly sick. 3 of the creatures were grouped against the mass of white, actually eating, the corruption. They whirled, hooting, as he came. He shot 2 of them, and as the third leaped for the wall, he dropped that one as well, and it fell with a dull gulping sound into the dough-pot. Again he sickened. The dough-pot drew away from it, leaving the thing lying in a hollow like the hole of a giant doughnut. Not even that monstrosity would eat these creatures. But the thing's leap had drawn Ham's attention to a 12-inch ledge. It might be, yes, it was possible, that he could traverse that rugged trail and so circle the dough-pot. Nearly hopeless, no doubt, to attempt it under the volley of stones, but he must. There was no alternative. He shifted the girl to free his right arm. He slipped a second clip in his automatic and then fired at random into the flitting shadows above. For a moment the hail of pebbles ceased, and with the convulsive, painful struggle, Ham dragged himself and Patricia to the ledge. Stones cracked about him once more. Step by step he edged along the way, poised just over the doomed dough-pot. Death below and death above. And little by little he rounded the bend. Above him both walls glowed in sunlight, and they were safe. At least, he was safe. The girl might be already dead, he thought frantically, as he slipped and slid through the slime of the dough-pot's passage. Out on the daylit slope, he tore the mask from her face and gazed on white, marble-cold features. It was not death, however, but only drugged torpor. An hour later she was conscious, though weak, and very badly frightened. Yet almost her first question was for her pack. "It's here," Ham said. "What's so precious about your pack? Your notes?" "My notes? Oh, no." A faint flush covered her features. I kept trying to tell you, it's your Zickshell." "What?" "Yes, of course I didn't throw it to the molds. It's yours by right, Ham. Lots of British traders go into the American heartlands. I just slit the pouch and hid it here in my pack. The molds on the ground were only some twigs I threw there to make it look real." But why?" The flush deepened. "I wanted to punish you," Patricia whispered, "for being so cold and distant." "I?" Ham was amazed. "It was you!" "Perhaps it was at first. You forced your way into my house, you know. But after you carried me across the mud-spout, Ham, it was different." Ham gulped. Suddenly he pulled her into his arms. "I'm not going to quarrel about whose fault it was," he said, "but we'll settle one thing immediately. We're going to Aradia, and that's where we'll be married. In a good American church, if they've put one up yet, or by a good American justice, if they haven't. There's no more talk of Madman's Pass and crossing the mountains of eternity. Is that clear?" She glanced at the vast looming peaks and shuddered. "Quite clear," she replied meekly.